Hi, this is Tom Needham, and you're listening to the Sounds of Film. And I am very excited to have on the phone with us today filmmaker Judy Irving and author and film subject Mark Bittner. We're going to be talking about their documentary, The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill, which is newly restored and playing in theaters. Many of you know Judy, who's been on the program before. She's a Sundance and Emmy Award winning filmmaker. And some of her films that she's known for are The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill, Pelican Dreams, and Dark Circle. And Mark, as you probably know, was the subject of Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill. He's also an author and a musician and has done lots of things. All very interesting stuff. Judy, Mark, thank you so much for joining me on the program today to talk about Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So how many years has it been since this film originally came out?
20 years since it first played in festivals in 2003. So this is the 20th anniversary re-release.
I feel like this film just came out yesterday. I love this
So do
movie, and I'm sure it's been a big part of your lives. For our listeners who maybe don't know the whole story, can the two of you share how the two of you came together to make this film in the first place?
Mark?
No, you take it. Yeah, I mean, you're the filmmaker.
Well, Mark had been feeding some wild parrots in San Francisco, and I love birds, and I had made a couple of short films about birds, and a few friends of mine suggested that I get in touch with Mark because they thought it would be a good movie if I could make a movie about him and what his relationship was with the parrots. So that's how it happened. It was just a recommendation from a couple of friends, and I called him up and went over and saw these fabulous red and green birds flocking all around him, and that was the beginning.
And Mark, were you open to the idea right away of making yourself a subject of a documentary?
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with it at all, and I was actually hoping somebody would come along because I knew that my time with the parrots would be ending, and they're so colorful. I wanted a visual memory of the birds after I left, and I didn't expect, like a whole film, but just some little video or something. So it was fine with me. I didn't have any trouble with it, and it turned to me it was just an art project, and I like art projects.
I'm very curious. How did this film impact both of your lives? Because this film was shown all over the world. It was on television. It was in theaters. It must have made such a big impact, I would imagine, on the two of you.
Well, in my case, I had really been kind of a hermit for 30 years. For the longest time, I didn't have any ID, telephone, or anything. I never had a credit card. And then when it came time to promote the film, suddenly I'm flying all over the place, renting hotel rooms, renting cars, and all of this stuff. So that there was that kind of impact, but the birds themselves, were what was really important to me. I had been told that to protect them. At the time, there was a big non-native species movement. People were wanting to destroy non-native species, and somebody told me that you have to make them famous. That's their only real protection. That wouldn't be the case today, but the film really helped establish them. I mean, they're the official animal of San Francisco now.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and for me, I had been sort of toiling in the trenches of documentary filmmaking for many years since the early 70s, and I had had one feature-length documentary that we talked about, Tom, Dark Circle, but you know that one had come and gone, and I was making short films, environmental films in the Bay Area, but unsatisfied with that because they didn't seem to have much of an impact. And so this film was just really a joy to make. It was fun. It was easy to edit. It was just everything fell into place, and so I enjoyed the making of it. And then I didn't expect that it would be that popular. So that was a really pleasant surprise, because really none of my other films had ever made any real money. This too is a nonprofit project, so the resources went into production of other nonprofit films. But still, it was kind of amazing to me to be at that level of like having the film out in 500 theaters. I had no idea that it was going to go that big.
Now, with hindsight, do you have any better understanding what it was about this movie that just clicked with audiences?
Well, I think it was Mark's relationship with the birds, and Mark, what you know, what you learned from the birds.
Can you talk a little bit about that, Mark, for our listeners who haven't seen the film yet without giving it all away? Can you describe your relationship that you had with these incredible birds?
Yeah, I had been living on the street for a long period of time. I wasn't exactly what you'd call homeless. It was more, I was a street person. I had places to stay, but I didn't have anything that I rented. And then I got an opportunity to caretake a place. And I was way isolated from the community I'd been in. And it was a very lonely period for me, and I was trying to make some changes. And the birds actually became my friends. They were the only friends I had during that early period of that time, at least. So I was seeing them like 3 and 4 times a day, every day. And I got to know their personalities. They got to trust me. And I knew what was going on within the flock all the time. And like I say, they were my friends. It wasn't just something, wasn't superficial. They got a feeling for the way I did things, and they worked along with that. And I got a sense of who they were.
I actually live across from a nature preserve here on Long Island, and my daughter volunteers at it, and they rescue birds. And it was so enjoyable to rewatch this film. I hadn't thought about the movie in a long time, and my daughter, along with a lot of other people, get really close to the birds. She gets to go in the cages and feed them, and she talks about them all the time.
Yeah.
And your film really reminded me that this is something that is possible. People and animals, birds in particular, in this case, can develop relationships. Can you talk about, because I don't think everybody really understands that. Um,
Yeah, well, that was really important to me because you start to realize that they're just like us in a lot of ways. They don't have the same intellectual capacity, but they get angry. They're sentimental in a certain way. And, you watch them get sick and you watch them die and they don't want to die and they're afraid of certain things. And you just learn all of these aspects of their mind that is the same as ours. And it's hard to know that if you're just looking at an animal from a distance. But when you're right there with them and you're interacting with them, it becomes very clear. It's not a theory.
I've always been fascinated with people who choose different lifestyles, and I was impressed in the beginning of the film, Mark, when you talk about how you wanted to be a musician, and you wanted to do this and that, and you kind of just followed your own path. A lot of people want to do that, but they just can't, or they just choose not to. And
Yeah, well, in a way, I wanted to be a musician because at the time, musicians were really cool, and I just wanted to be where the action was. But I wasn't really designed to be a musician, I think. It's not my basic nature. I wanted to be a writer before that, and I think I was more suited to it. But I persisted on trying to do something that I don't think I should have been doing, and when it fell apart, I didn't have anything left. I mean, I didn't have any other skills. So things just happened, and I had to follow them. I didn't have a path back into usual trips that most people take in the society. And I just had to stumble my way through until I found something that worked. I don't think it was courage or anything like that. It was just I didn't know what else to do.
It's funny, you hear people talk about artificial intelligence and how it's going to change things in the future. I know this is a little bit much, but some people are predicting a future where people won't have to have regular jobs and they can just sort of invest time in their hobbies, their interests, and stuff of that sort. And I don't know, I wonder whether if people had more time, would they end up doing things like you did? Not everyone, of course. Everyone has different interests, but it's amazing that you discovered this.
Well, I'm kind of omitting one thing in that I had developed this theory that you had to have a hard experience, preferably of the road or the streets, to find out who you really are. And so that was part of what was happening to me when my music thing fell apart. I was looking for a deeper understanding of things that I thought could only be found on the street. So that I ended up on them was kind of an accident, but I was afraid to go to the streets, but I thought that's where I was supposed to go. So a lot of it had to do with ideas that were going around in the 60s and 70s about, you know, how you find yourself.
Can I ask the two of you? I've been to San Francisco a few times, but not in recent years. And, a lot of the stuff that you hear as an outsider now is that there's a real issue with homelessness. I don't know that you would phrase it that way, but that's the way it's often portrayed in news these days. Um, can you speak to what the situation is like now compared to how it was 20 years ago?
Well, the biggest difference to me about homelessness is there used to be all of these sort of gradual steps between the street and having a place of your own. And they've gotten eliminated over time so that there aren't like these single room occupancy hotels that were really cheap. They don't exist anymore. So it's like you're either paying a high rent or you're on the street. It's gotten to be more and more like that. But I don't think it's true just of San Francisco. I mean, my hometown, Vancouver, Washington, has a big homelessness problem, and it's a completely different kind of place than San Francisco. I think it's a national thing.
Yeah,
Life has gotten expensive.
yeah, that's true. Can you describe for our audience the place that you were staying in? It just looked like such a unique place. Um, and how
The
much is
house
that
or the
place like
area?
worth the actual shelter that you were living in? You know,
It was an old. It was built by a sea captain back in a little bit after the gold rush, and it was no longer being used. I had been caretaking the main house of the estate, which was behind it and much larger and modern. But they decided to sell that place and put it on the market, and I had to get out of there. And I didn't have any place else to go, so there was this little old cottage. I had actually been staying in it earlier legally, but there was a woman living above me who needed help. She was getting older and she had emphysema. So she agreed to conceal my presence there, and I was basically squatting for the last 3 years.
did you have to literally walk up all those stairs that you see in the film every time to go?
Literally,
That was the only way to get to the place.
still is.
Yeah,
Wow.
still is. We're actually speaking to you from another little old cottage right next door to that one on the same steps. That's where we live now.
Wow. One of the things that struck me about the film also, in terms of how it was made, Judy, was that documentary filmmakers have all different views about whether to interject themselves in the story or not. And
Hmm.
when you watch this movie, I won't spoil the ending because if people haven't seen the film, there's a nice little surprise at the end. Unless you're talking about it, I'll leave that up to you. But your voice does come up periodically throughout the film. some kind of
Hmm.
narration, and it's an interesting mix between you and Mark. And stylistically, it's not always done that way. Why did you decide to do it in the fashion that you did?
Well, you know, Dark Circle was a film about the nuclear issue that I narrated. So in a sense, that was a personal film about a political issue. Wild Parrots became a personal film as I was making it. Um, but I had to think hard about how much I wanted to interject myself into the story, or like ask Mark questions off screen. Some of the questions that I was asking him in the film are basically stand-in questions for what I knew the audience would be asking in their own minds,
Right.
but at that point in the story, why don't you get a job? I was sort of playing devil's advocate, and but trying to keep a light touch and not interfere with his story. So it's also, I mean, over the years as a documentary filmmaker, I've noticed that there is a lot more acceptance now for the filmmaker to have some sort of a presence in the movie.
Yeah.
In a sense, it's a false separation. When you're making the film, you're always making decisions about what to film and how to edit and so forth. And so I think it's become more accepted to have the filmmaker have some sort of presence. And I'm glad of that, because it makes it more nuanced and it makes it a little bit more complex in my mind.
It does.
So, yeah.
And even let's just use the question that you gave as an example. You said, why don't you just it seems like maybe that's not really what your opinion. It's not that it's an opinion, but you assume that some people would be thinking that.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't have put it that way myself, but I just could feel the audience looking at the film,
Yeah.
and probably a fair number of them, at least partway through the movie, before they came to understand all that those birds were offering Mark in terms of understanding of consciousness and death and all kinds of topics that you wouldn't expect. They would be asking themselves questions like that. Why are you making it so hard on yourself? Why don't you just go get a job?
One thing I always like to point out is that if I'd had a job, there would have been no film.
Right.
There wouldn't have been a relationship with the parrots.
Exactly. Yeah.
Besides some of those comments that you make, questions that you ask, there's also a few shots, particularly inside the place where Mark was staying, that it just seemed like you were pointing out unglamorous side of it, I guess. I'm thinking in particular, like in some ways the place looked super cool, but then you would go to a shot of it looked like there was like cooking utensils over the
On
toilet.
the toilet.
Yeah, that kind of
Right.
thing. Why did you
Right.
want to show that?
Well, because that was the reality. That was how Mark was living. He was living very close to the bone, and the cottage itself was a falling down, uh, you know, super old structure that had mold in the walls and stuff. And he was taking care of birds inside the house, and so there were sunflower seeds all over the rug. So I was just showing what was real.
Yeah. Mark, are you taking care of any birds, or are you doing anything with birds right now?
Well, we have two living here
What kind?
from the flock that are not. They can't be free because they have disabilities. But beyond that, no. I that was something that I did, and I reached the end of it, and I didn't want to repeat it. It you know,
Yeah.
I moved on to other things.
What kinds of things are you interested in today?
Well, I spent the last 17 years working on a book about my life on the street, and I'm looking for a publisher for it now. I'm done with the book, but I spent a lot of time working on it, getting it just right. So my aims as a writer are what matters to me most.
It's called Street Song.
Oh yeah, it's called Street Song.
Could there be a companion documentary?
Well, no, but there's a companion album. Mark, why don't you talk about the album?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was as I was working on it, I used to read a lot of musician biographies, and they'd talk about some performance by an artist and that I hadn't heard, and it would always annoy me. And so as I'm working on this book, I'm describing my voice, and I thought, well, I should do some little recordings just so that people know what I did. And a friend of mine has a studio, and I went in there, and I was kind of rusty at first, but I got into it, and the thing just kept growing. I was fascinated being in a studio, all the
Yeah.
things you can do in a studio. So it turned into a major production, and it was going to be just supplemental to the book, but now I see it as integral.
Yeah, every song in the album has something to do with the book,
Yeah.
a certain phase of the book.
Oh.
And 4 of those songs are they streaming now, Mark, on the live?
Yeah, the San Francisco Library is streaming 4 of the songs. I have some of them on YouTube.
That's great. So maybe we'll feature those on the program.
Sure.
Oh, that would be
Interview.
cool. That would
Yeah.
be great.
Yeah, that would be really fantastic.
There's a song called Street Song, by the way.
Mhm.
Tell me about the song, and I know you can't tell me about the whole book, but tell me just in general, one of the major themes that you want to do.
Well, what the book actually is, I grew up in the suburbs, middle class, comfortable, and I felt really dissatisfied. And as I went along, I started developing this idea about how to get real. And that was by having, a hard experience on the street. I thought it was vital. But I was afraid to do it, but I just kept inching my way toward it. And so a lot of the story is the my route to the street. I think when people see homeless people, they often wonder, well, how did he get that way? I wasn't exactly homeless. I was pretty much clean all the time. But there were times when I was sleeping in alleys. So how do you get there? I was different from the others because I was there in a sense for philosophical reasons, you might say. But the story is mostly that journey from the middle class to living in an alley. And the glories along the way.
And Judy, did you know right away, like when you met Mark, that he was a special guy? I mean, I know people recommended to you to check out what was going on here with his relationship with the birds, but um, as we talked about earlier, Mark, you're just a fascinating individual, very philosophical, very smart. You tell a good story. You seem caring, and that really comes across in the movie. Judy, did you sense that right away when you met?
Well, my memory of that first encounter was that I didn't sense it right away, but I looked back in my journal, and in fact I did. I said to myself that very day that I first saw him feeding the birds, this this could really be good, and how should I approach it? And my first thought was to make it just seemed so magical on the steps there with the colorful birds and everything that it should be a children's fable. And so my first attempt was to make a short children's film about Mark and the birds. But that was a complete and utter disaster.
Why?
Well, the birds didn't show up when they had the kids there, and then uh, some of the kids just couldn't take their eyes off the camera. They just kept looking at the camera, and you can't do that in a movie. So it was just a big mess. It didn't. But I heard Mark telling the kids stories during those days of shooting, and I realized what a great storyteller he was. And I also thought, well, if I could get some of that behavior that he's talking about with the birds and key it to his stories, that's essentially, what a lot of the film is about.
Yeah, it really helped.
One thing I'd like to add is that I also wrote a book called The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill, which is completely different than the movie. A lot of people assume that it's sort of a novelization of the film, but it's not. And it tells the whole story and tells some of my backstory as well. So for people that have questions about the details of why I did what I did, it's all in there.
Right, and that book came out before the movie. Mark had been working on it before I met him and finished it and had it published. The hardcover came out in 2004, and the movie really didn't make a big splash until 2005. And the book covers was it 6 years, Mark?
Yeah, 6 years.
6 whole years of his relationship with the flock. And the movie only covers the last year or year and a half of his time there.
Seems
So
like,
they are different. A lot
yeah,
of people think they're the same, but they're not.
it seems like, I mean, I know documentary filmmakers look for stories with a narrative, and the fact that you kind of jumped in, Judy, when he only had a short period of time to live where he was living. But the fact that there was going to be an ending to his story, this really makes it a perfect narrative. And I don't want to give away too much about the ending, but
Right,
people
it
really have
does.
to
I
see
mean,
it.
I was afraid that, I would start filming and then he would have to leave a couple weeks later. I mean, that was always a thought, but I did have enough time um, to film enough before he had to leave. I got lucky. And his having to leave created this narrative arc that I really needed.
Yeah. Well, a lot of artists talk about how they're known for like a hit song or a TV show that they did 30 years ago. The two of you will inevitably be remembered for this film, which I think is a great thing. Mark, you said you have moved on, but both of you have been with this movie for 20 years. You've shown it to many audiences. You know the things that people bring up after the film when there's Q&As. Um, when you look back at this whole long experience of bringing this film to the public, and now there's a newly restored version, um, what is it that you think people most love about this film?
I think it's heartfelt, and it's not put on feeling. Um, there's a lot of funny stuff. There's a lot of sad stuff. There's a lot of sincere stuff, but all of it, none of it's manufactured. And I think that's what people like about it, that it's just real.
Also, I think people are just longing for some real connection with the natural world, and Mark had it uh, big time. And so to characterize wild birds as literally different personalities is kind of surprising, but it's also really endearing and unforgettable in a way, you know. So I think that's why it has staying power. It's not dated.
Yeah, it's a really special film, and it seems even fresher to me in today's
Hmm.
world. Um, I don't know why. I think things have just gotten so crazy, over the past
Yeah.
couple of years that sit down and watch this movie and see someone just interacting with animals in such a peaceful, loving way. It's such a contrast to everything that's going on in the world today.
Yeah, it's scary.
But I want to
Yeah,
thank. Yeah, go ahead. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
No, go.
Oh, I've made two feature documentaries since the Parrots. One is A Valentine to Pelicans, my favorite big bird, and the other one, it's called Pelican Dreams. And the other one is one that I just finished recently which is coming out now, called Cold Refuge, about people who have real challenges and what it means to them to be able to swim in cold open water like San Francisco Bay. So I'm still sort of interested in that connection between human beings and the natural world, and in particular, the natural world that's right around cities and that you might not expect would have so much to offer. You don't have to go super far away to the wilderness to be able to immerse yourself in the real world. That's kind of one of my themes too, that came out of working on the parrots.
Well, I've been reading a little bit about Cold Refuge, and hopefully we can have you on the program again to talk some more about it. Can you just tell our listeners really quickly the idea for the film in a little bit more detail?
Well, yeah, I've been swimming in the bay, in San Francisco Bay, since the mid '80s, and it's special. It used to be completely under the radar, this idea that swimming in cold open water is good for you.
Right.
But now it's kind of all the rage. It's really weird. It's gotten much more popular um, since I started the film. But basically, I'm profiling in the film 5 different characters who are confronted with, for instance, being blind. One of them is a blind swimmer. One is getting over cancer. Another one is under super stress. There's a family that's grieving the lost mom, and there's a guy in a wheelchair who swims literally from Alcatraz to shore using only his arms. So it's not about personal records or competition, but it's about dealing with major challenges, um, and how immersing yourself in the natural world helps.
Does it
But it's
help?
not a testimonial.
Does
I
it
hate
help?
testimonials.
Does it just help mentally, or are there actually like health benefits in
Oh,
terms
it
of
helps
like?
physically. Yeah, it helps mentally and physically and spiritually and psychologically. It helps in every way. It increases. Yeah, I didn't want to go into the scientific side of it much because I feel like it's more of a spiritual experience, to make that kind of connection uh, with harbor seals and sea lions and birds and cold water.
Well, Judy and Mark, I want to thank you both for coming on the Sounds of Film. We've been speaking about the Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill. Is there a website that people can go to learn about where the film is screening?
I have on my website, yeah, the schedule. It keeps growing. There's 3 cities now, but it's markbittner.net.
I hope everyone gets a chance to see this in theaters. It's a beautiful looking film, and it was such a pleasure to talk about this movie again. I want to wish the two of you best of luck with all your music and this other documentary, as well as the re-release of the Wild Parrots of.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Talk to you soon, hopefully.
Okay.
Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.